our Petty Astrology regulars back today to talk about the solstice, which is happening the day after this podcast comes out. So, welcome back, Mackenzie and Jen. How are you guys?
Good.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I am just living for this Gemini energy that we've got going on, doing a lot of yapping and a lot of crying too.
It's a lot.
And that's on 12th house Gemini. And if you're listening and you're like, "Oh, I'm scared of the 12th house," don't be scared of the 12th house. A lot of the crying has been like really needed. It feels like I'm kind of exercising some demons that need to kind of get out of the way. It's not been a bad thing. It's just been emotional and like confronting, stuff that maybe I haven't kind of observed. There's just being very out there and brought to my attention. So it's been like a clearing for me. But, everybody's got Gemini in a different place in their chart. So it's probably very different depending on where that's happening. But today we're talking about the solstice. And so this year we are celebrating the solstice on June 20th. And the sun is moving into Cancer at 1:51 p.m. Pacific time. So, in terms of like the astrology of it all, the solstice is coinciding with Cancer season. And so, if you're newer to astrology, something that's really good to know is that cardinal signs are the starters of the zodiac. They start the seasons. And so, not too long ago, we talked about the spring equinox, which is also the new year in astrology. And that is Aries season. That's the beginning of Aries season. And so, when we celebrate the solstice, which is the beginning of summer here in the Northern Hemisphere, that is the beginning of Cancer season. And then of course in the fall, Libra is the start of fall in the Northern Hemisphere, and then Capricorn is the start of winter, and that's the winter solstice. So these are just significant markers in the year for starting the seasons, and we can talk more about that. But we're going to talk about Cancer season primarily today. So first I want to talk about the astronomy of it all. So Jen is our resident educator, our professor. So Jen, would you mind explaining to us what the solstice is astronomically?
Yeah, all four of the cardinal signs kind of kick off like an event astronomically. It's when like the period of day to night kind of changes. So during like the spring equinox, that's when it's equal night and day is the equinox, but the spring equinox, there's starting to be more light. And then the summer solstice, starting with Cancer season, is the period where there is the most daylight. And then after that point, it gets less. It's just because of how Earth orbits the sun. Um, at that solstice point, we're just like tilted at just the right angle, and we're at the like most extreme point where we're getting the most sunlight. Um, in the northern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, it's winter, obviously, just because of the tilt of the Earth. And then as you move to the fall equinox in when Libra season starts, that's another equal night, equal day, and then it moves into being more nighttime hours in the northern hemisphere until you get to Capricorn, which is the winter solstice, and then it flips. Um, so yeah, those are just like the cardinal points of the of the orbit around the sun. So there's significant points of the zodiac, which I think gives some of the astrological meaning to it, of it kicking off a season, of it, kind of being a harbinger of change, because like very physically in our lives, if you're outside in the sun, like you'll notice the sun is, setting later and later, and then suddenly it starts setting earlier. So it's like very physically grounded in the way that, astrology was originally intended to be used.
Right, I know. Fancy that, right?
Yeah, like it has a reason. There's a reason that
Mm-hmm.
these things mean the things they do. There's, you know, it's observational sort of science. There's like a cleaving off of astrology from astronomy, but for a very long time they were the same thing. The people that were mathematicians and astronomers were astrologers. It was kind of like translating the messages of the sky for people. And yeah, now there's just kind of this divide between people that study the stars and the movements of the planets and then astrologers, which I think we can kind of bridge that gap a little bit. That's what I like to do in my studies,
Yeah.
because um, I think it's important to know why things are happening, why they mean the things that they mean, why people, considered things to mean stuff. And I just like science and math. That's
Yeah.
what I do. So
Yeah, I think it's so important to understand that that's how astrology came about. It was through observation and correlation. And, in terms of these moments in the year, like they coincide with real changes that we are experiencing in our physical world. It's not just like, oh, somebody was like, Cancer is going to be the starter of, the summer. It's just there, it really relates to actual experiences that we're having. So thank you for explaining the astronomy of it all to us who are maybe not scientists. I'm not. Also, we should say that when we're referring to like seasons in astrology, like when I say Cancer season, that is when the sun is moving into Cancer. So every month we have a change in what astrological season it is, at least in the language that I use. And so this will be the start of Cancer season. So do you guys celebrate the solstice? Do you guys celebrate the start of Cancer season?
I kind of celebrate all of the solstices and equinoxes just because they are like
Mm-hmm.
a significant time in the year. And just knowing what they mean, like astronomically, I'm like, okay, this is a turning point. I kind of cut my years into like 12-week periods where I'll have like specific goals I
Mm-hmm.
want to accomplish, which lines up with that. So it's about like like 3 months, like a whole season's like a spring goal, a summer goal, fall, winter, and then so yeah, when it's the solstice or equinox, I'll kind of sit down and be like, okay, what do I want to accomplish? What are like two big goals that I want to do, and like breaking it down like week by week. What can I get done? What is like feasible for me? Because I have a very busy schedule, so it's good for me to kind of like break down when I have those bigger goals, because otherwise it can just like not happen. Like people setting New Year's resolutions. It's kind of like my mini seasonal resolutions. It's much
Mm-hmm.
easier to keep track if it's like not such a big I don't know, pie in the sky kind of a goal that you're gonna do every new year.
Yeah.
It's like a good check-in.
Yeah, it's such a great use of astrology because I don't know about you guys, but for me, time is just a very big thing. Like it just, I mean, just thinking about the years going by, especially, I'm in my 30s now. So I've put some decades behind me. And so it can be very overwhelming when I'm like looking at the future and I'm like, what do I want to do next? Having these seasonal markers for me, just compared to, Kaycee before astrology, it was a dark place. It was a dark place. There's a lot less going on in terms of marking these seasons. And so it could feel really overwhelming for somebody like me. I have a Capricorn moon, so I tend to like, I look really into the future. I tend to look really forward. And on a personality level, my personal opinion is that the cardinal signs are the most unhinged in certain ways. And,
Mm-hmm.
I have
Oh
some
yeah.
theories about why that could be. But especially for like Cancer season, for me, it's a really interesting time of year. I'm a Cancer rising, and so I've got Cancer in some of my 12th house and then in the first house. And so when Cancer season starts, when the solstice happens, it's always in my 12th house. And for me, it's a little bit like I like it, but it's also giving summertime sadness a little bit. Like there is this kind of like romantic kind of darkness that's happening for me
You're giving
every year.
Lana Del Rey.
It's giving Lana Del Rey by the pool, smoking and pondering. And so for me, every year the solstice is this kind of like it's a rebirth that's about to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. I'm like preparing for this rebirth every year. So I have a very interesting relationship with the summer solstice in particular for that reason. What about you guys?
Yeah, every summer solstice, like probably over the last 5 years or so, I try and get outside and, like try and absorb some of the sun's rays or whatever, because there's something symbolic about, just like this being like the longest amount of time the sun's out in the year. And so I've always been like very, just trying to get outside and be in nature. And I also try to incorporate some like gold onto my altar or whatever, and kind of like honor my
Mm.
ancestors in a way. And it's funny because Cancer, governs like our ancestors, and connecting that way. So I think that's kind of cool that I even did that before I like got into astrology. But yeah, that's kind of a little bit of what I do, and I try and like, set some crystals out or whatever,
I love that you intuitively like picked up on the ancestral part of Cancer energy even before getting into
Hmm.
astrology, because that's another really important association with Cancer energy, especially related to our maternal side, or like the more nurturing parent side of the family.
Hmm.
So that's a really important thing, and maybe people that are listening might find some way that they can incorporate that aspect of things into their celebrations if they do any kind of solstice stuff. What about you, Jen?
I don't really do a whole lot. I just kind of think about it and like set my goals, but I don't have
Yeah.
any like set rituals, I guess.
Hmm.
I mean, I'll do like a vision board
Yeah.
or something, but
Love a vision board. Yeah. It's not, nobody has to do anything for any of these occasions. It's like the energy is still there, and you can choose to engage with that energy in whatever way is meaningful or helpful for you. So there's no like, one size fits all for any of this. And yeah, like, Mackenzie, you do very specific rituals. Jen, you're like, I'm, maybe a vision board, and me, I'm like, I'm just staring off into space and like tearing and laughing and crying. So, it's going to be different strokes for different folks, and no judgment about, how or if you even choose to celebrate, the solstice. But I love,
Hmm.
like, one of the things that I really love about astrology is that there is always something to celebrate in a way. Like, they're just because, time is always passing. That's kind of what it does. And so there's always some event, some kind of shift in the energy that we can look forward to, which I really appreciate because, things can feel very like monotonous at certain points in our life. And like, one of the lovely things about astrology is that it's such a good reminder that things are always evolving and the energy is always shifting. So it's like, even if we are having a period of our lives that we're not necessarily like, this is not my favorite time to be alive, it's going to shift, it's going to pass. There
Hmm.
is no, for better or for worse, things don't stay the same. So there's always something to look forward to. There's lots of reasons to celebrate and lots of ways to engage in these like energy shifts that we go through. And again, we get a new astrological season every month with the shift of the sun. So these big seasonal shifts are just kind of like, they're like markers in bold, is how I would say. But we get one every
Hmm.
month, so there's always movement happening.
That kind of makes me think of like the
Hmm.
crab a little bit, Cancer the crab, and how it just kind of it can live on land and in water, and how it's
Hmm.
adaptable in a way. I think you know Gemini gets kind of coined the more adaptable sign, but I think each sign there's an
Hmm.
adaptability to it. And I do think there is like a big difference between Gemini and Cancer energy. It's kind of like almost like diving into water. Like it's just like there's a difference, but then there's still that adaptability, and kind of like a smoothness to how each of the signs kind of melts into the next,
Yeah,
kind of, if that
absolutely.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
Well, let's talk about that, like the shift from Gemini season into Cancer season. To me, I don't know. I feel like it's one of the more smooth shifts in the year for me personally. I don't exactly know why that is. I haven't really thought about it too much before just saying it. So, but I do notice that I don't know. Maybe it's just the weather of it all. Like for me here in Los Angeles,
Hmm.
it usually is starting to warm up and almost feels like summer a little bit before it is actually summer. So I think for that reason, it's like a little bit less of a distinct shift in that way. But I mean, Gemini is an air sign and it is very quick, and Cancer is very adaptable, but there it doesn't have for me that same like quickness with it. I think it's a lot more of
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
slower sign in certain ways, like vibes wise. What do you guys think?
Yeah. It just makes me think of like going from being up in your head in the Gemini energy of like just the boop boop boop, like your thoughts going everywhere.
Hmm.
Look over here. Oh, what am I gonna do today? Like it's just like
Yeah.
all over, and then getting into Cancer season, it's kind of like dropping into your body and you're like, okay, how do I feel about this? It's a little, it's
Mm-hmm.
it's like a similar
Hmm.
kind of adaptive energy, um, but I feel like with Gemini, it's more like snappy and quick and sharp. And with Cancer, it is more
Mm-hmm.
like flowy, like water, like it just melds one into the other. Like when you're feeling an emotion, it's kind of like connected to a bunch of different things going on. It's kind of hard to parse out exactly, like using your
Hmm.
head, like where's that's coming from. And that's not always like super
Right.
useful when you're dealing
Hmm.
with emotions and they're not
Mm-hmm.
rational.
Yeah, and Gemini feels a lot more external to me because it is very outward facing. And if we're looking at communication or gaining information, it usually has some relationship to stuff that's outside of us. And Cancer feels a lot more personal, a lot more internal in certain ways. And not that Cancer energy doesn't engage with that which is outside of it, because it definitely does, but it just feels a lot less outward comparatively.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I like what you said, Jen, about like it just kind of being flowy, because it is just very like, flowing and just kind of slower. And it makes me think of like the tides, even, and um, even just like the moon cycle and how it just kind of slow transition, like slowly getting bigger and then slowly getting smaller. And yeah, it's just like a gradual, and there's like
Hmm.
a rhythm to Cancer energy
Oh,
as well,
yeah.
I feel like.
That's a great point. And Cancer is ruled by the moon, which is an important thing to say when we're talking about Cancer energy. So that's a really great association. Like it does have these phases and cycles and kind of a predictability, even though it's always changing, but it is sort of predictable in that way.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have been thinking about for our audience is like how can we take advantage of Cancer season with where we're at right now in June of 2024. And for me, like coming out of this very Gemini heavy energy, been thinking about really kind of taking those ideas and the things that we're excited about doing in the world and what we're excited about engaging with in the world, and kind of grounding that internally and like on an emotional level, what is our relationship to those things that we're thinking and the people that we're engaging with, like how are we grounding all of that on an emotional level, on a personal level, as we like prepare to continue to move forward, because of course time keeps going.
Yeah, Cancer energy to me is like about nurturing relationships, with people that are very close to you, especially because Cancer is like associated with the family, and it's kind of like your very inner circle. Um, those are the people that you rely on the most to like process emotions with, or just to talk through things with. Um, so that shift
Hmm.
from like Gemini energy of being like more involved in like maybe community or like people outside of the house, and then you come in Cancer energy and you're kind of like you're in the cave, you're with like your people, and
Hmm.
how can you work with those people and foster those relationships so that, going forward past the summer, can like thrive together. So I think it's about kind of like, or you can like nurture an idea too, like you were saying, and that's very important to, after you plant the seed, to be like checking in, maybe like weeding some things or like making adjustments to nutrients that it's getting. That's an important part of
Yeah.
raising something up.
Yeah, and intellect and ideas, like if we have ideas that we're very passionate about, I think it really is important to reflect on how pursuing those ideas feels for us. And I think culturally, we're just really trained to not feel the feelings. And I think Cancer season kind of makes us reflect on those things and invites us to feel into the ideas more on a personal level, on an emotional level, in a way that, Gemini is not an emotional sign. And it's not that people that have strong Gemini energy don't have feelings, because they definitely do. Ask me how I know. But it's not the most, it's not, that's not the focus of Gemini energy, is not an emotional thing. And so in our very fast-paced modern world, it can be very important that we actually prioritize sitting with our feelings and like actually valuing the information that we get from that too, because that is also information. We just don't necessarily like treat it like that. And so another thing with Cancer energy, Cancer is associated with the mother or the more nurturing parent. And something that I see a lot with Cancer energy, especially in people that are socialized to be girls or women, is that we are urged to take that nurturing energy and point it at people that are around us and not internally, right? Give it all away to other people. And, it's kind of a stereotype even of like motherhood, right? It's, you take care of everyone else and then you're kind of run ragged, and well, that's just mom, and get her wine. It's just kind of sad, like the way that we regard, motherhood,
Yes.
right? And I think it says so much about how we regard like nurturing or, just being like an emotional being. It's like you kind of have to put all of that aside to do your job or whatever and show up for other people. And that is one really quick way to burn out. And it's very normalized, I think, for us to do that to ourselves even.
Yeah, whenever I am like reading for somebody who has really strong like Cancer placements, I always stress like you need to fill up your own cup before you try and pour into other people's cup, because you will burn yourself out very, very quickly trying to pour from an empty cup. Like you're just running on fumes. And yeah, so I always like to stress that. And like that's important for everyone, not just people with Cancer placements. But I do see like when people have strong Cancer energy, they're kind of like, like, let me just take care of you, like over here. That way I don't have to deal with my own, my own
Oh my
feelings,
gosh. Yes.
But yeah.
Right. That's it. I mean, being
Yeah.
helpful, being the helper is also a way to bypass our own feelings. It's like, well, I'm just too busy, and it's like, well, that
Yep.
actually, you do actually need to sit with how you feel. And like, that is important too. So there's like two sides to it. It can be used
Mm-hmm.
as kind of like a control mechanism for your own emotions or for people around you. Like, oh, I'm too busy. I got to take care of everything else. So, who cares about this other stuff that
Mm-hmm.
is definitely really important.
Yeah, I do feel like our emotions, it's like it's our body trying to tell us something. And so it's really important to pay attention to, what emotions come up when you are taking that time to, nurture and care for yourself. I had a moment the other day where I was like, I'm constantly telling people to feel into their body. And I just kind of realized I hadn't been taking the time to do that myself. And so I had just a moment the other day, and, all these tears were just coming up, and I was just letting it flow. And I felt a lot better
Yeah.
afterwards.
Right?
Isn't that
I know.
funny?
It's really annoying as astrologers when we realize like, oh, actually this advice is for me also. And
Yes,
that is the
always.
Cancer energy. It's like it can be so easy to see other people around you that you're like, oh, they really deserve my nurturing and my support, and we forget that we are also part of that equation. And and
Hmm.
it's there's nothing wrong with being a caring person or caring for other people, but at the same time we really have to remember that we have to help ourselves just as much as we help other people, or we're going to be ineffective at both. you know
Hmm.
we want to kind of come at it from a more healthy place. And I love what you said, Mackenzie, about listening to your emotions, because Cancer energy is very intuitive, but it's only intuitive if we listen to the information that we're getting. And emotions aren't always true, in the sense that, like, I've had feelings about things
Hmm.
that were maybe misplaced about situations, because I just had a feeling. It's okay to just have a feeling. You don't necessarily need to like project it onto other people or whatever. You can feel your feelings without, getting it all on other people as well. But I think it is important to actually like sit with that emotional information that we're getting, and kind of also weigh, like, is this something that is real, that I like need to take action on? Does this telling me that something in my life needs to be adjusted, changed, nurtured, whatever the circumstance might be? So there's really important information in that Cancer energy. It's different information because it's not coming from this part of ourselves, and that's where we usually like think of information is coming from. It's
Hmm.
not all intellectual. So I think it's an important part of like understanding our body and like developing our discernment as well, to listen to those cues that we're getting. And a lot of people that we're socialized as girls or women are trained to downplay our emotions because we are too emotional, So a lot of us have to do this work,
Hmm.
not only to, develop on an individual level, but to kind of uncover some of that grime of socialization that has taught us to ignore this information, to downplay it, that it's irrational, that it's inherently distracting or not valuable. We really like have to actively undo that in ourselves. And so Cancer season is a great time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, not to get into the patriarchy capitalism of it all, but to, we're gonna get into that because
Let's
of
do it.
course, I do feel like that maternal feminine energy that is represented by Cancer, of like being in touch with your emotions and listening to your body, we get really alienated from that in capitalism because it's not productive for the powers that be, for us to be in touch with ourselves and like feeling what we're feeling. They just want us to be like workers, people just like push through it, like it doesn't matter if you're uncomfortable, doesn't matter what you feel about your job, like you just show up, we give you money. There's like this very impersonal exchange that's going on, and I do feel like that contributes a lot to people being disconnected from their bodies, from their feelings, because even if those things come up, they have to shove them down just to be able to survive. And
Yeah.
so it is kind of like a radical act to me to be able to sit and listen to your body and being holding space for that. Um, and there is a little bit of grief there once you're like coming back in after being absent in a sense for so long, just like in survival mode, having to come back down and be in touch with like how you actually feel about a situation, and not just like how you have to force yourself to feel to work and survive. um yeah, and we just devalue women's labor so much in our society, of being like, well, that's her role, she's supposed to give up everything for everybody else around her, and that was what makes you a good woman, a good wife, if you're a good mom. If you're not doing that, if you pour any energy into yourself, then you're selfish and you're doing something wrong. um, and like Mackenzie was saying, like you can't pour from an empty cup. So that's just what is expected of you. You're supposed to drain yourself dry, have nothing left for yourself. And it's just fucking crazy. Like, that's not how we are meant to operate as human beings at all. we're not supposed to, even like if you're a woman, you're not supposed to be cut off from taking care of yourself, from loving yourself, from feeling your emotions and expressing that. There's a lot of rage, I feel like, that is unexpressed in women that have to suppress their desires and things that they truly feel inside. And then on like the more masculine energy side, there's like two, like they take the only emotion they're allowed is rage and anger. And then there's just this disconnect from like a sense of loving and connection. And it's very sad for both parties. Like for both energies, there's just deep wounding, and lashing out at like each other is not productive. Like it's hurting all of us in different ways, but one is not better than the other. It's both, just kind of pitting us against each other in capitalism to, be of the best use for the powers that be, the people that are making money off of women having children and sending them to work, and men, abusing their bodies or just grinding themselves into the ground to be hard workers, until like you meet these. I do blue collar work, so I really get to see this up front and personal with like the men that are just so disconnected from their bodies, from their selves and their emotions, that they work like 10-hour days at a very physical job and their bodies hurt so badly, and then they just drown it with alcohol, or and they don't feel anything and they just go to sleep. They come to work hungover the next day and they just do that for like 60 hours a week, don't get to see their children. Yeah, it's just like really, really sad.
Depressing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that you're so right. Like the connection between the way that our society is set up and this emotional bypassing that we're trained to do is so glaring. And that's, I think, another reason why it's so important for us to encourage people to take that emotional power back, because again, those emotions are telling you something. They're telling you that something is really wrong with the way that our society is set up. And the only people that are benefiting from us continuing to bypass these feelings are the people that benefit from the system being what it is, that are making a lot of money off of it. And so it is really radical and really important and crucial for us as just human beings to feel our feelings and sit with it and not fear the emotions, because like time, emotions pass. We don't have to fear them. We can feel them, we can have releases through them, we can get information from them, but we really shouldn't be afraid of feeling things. And I think one of the ways that we get less afraid of it is by practicing it, by just letting ourselves feel the feelings, letting ourselves have that cry, that release, and afterwards being like, actually, I feel a lot better that I was able to be honest and open about my feelings, even if it was just with myself. That's all anybody can ask.
I did find that coming to astrology really helped me like deconstructing those ideas in a way, because for a long time I was very disconnected from my emotions, and then finding out that I'm like a Cancer moon, I was like, oh shit. I was like, yeah, when I was a kid, like I was much more expressive of my emotions. It was much more free. And then yeah, it's just as you grow, as you're socialized in this society, you kind of learn like, okay, that's not acceptable. Like you can't just burst into tears. You can't like just be, even like having exuberant joy is kind of looked at like, what is wrong with you? Like, what are you doing? You can't be too loud. You can't be like a disruption. Children are to be seen and not heard, and it's not professional or whatever to, you know, be upset in any way or have any sort of reaction to things that people are doing to you.
Oh yeah. I remember when I started like my real adult work, one of my parents, I won't name them, but one of my parents was like, "Make sure you don't cry at work." And I was like, "Excuse me?" Which I didn't cry in front of anyone else. There was like a couple times where stuff happened that made me emotional and I just went to the bathroom and cried. But yeah, like that is a real warning that I got. And I understand why. It wasn't somebody trying to like tell me to, not be an emotional person, but they understood the repercussions of me potentially crying in a work environment. I wouldn't have done it anyway because I'm a Scorpio. Like, please, please, honey. But I understood where they were coming from, as annoying as it was.
Yeah. There is like this certain mask that we have to put on to perform for capitalism. But I think it's really, really important as you're deconstructing that, which is what we encourage people to do, to know that you have to tap into you, like take off
Mm-hmm.
the mask once, like leave that once you're
Mm-hmm.
not at work, because if you
Yeah.
keep that on all the time, it tears you up from the inside. That's why we have so many like just health issues and like mental issues in our societies, because people are so cut off from themselves. um, yeah.
Yeah, it's really sad. It's really, really sad. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing about Cancer energy is that it is, connected to what we consider our people. And so, like, on a broader social level, like on a more community level, if we kind of transfer that energy outward, like, imagine what would be possible if we shifted our culture to where we could be more in touch with our emotions, we could be more open about it, like the potential, the revolutionary potential of such a thing is like incredible what it could lead to, because so many people are really in denial that a lot of our cultural issues like require changes. People don't really want to shift the way that we do things, but it's just very obvious that we need to. Thank you both for coming on and talking to me about the solstice. I hope that we all have a lovely beginning to our Cancer seasons, and I will see you guys next time.
Bye.